Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Set the Line podcast. As always, I'm Sam, joined by my co-host Braden.
How we doing?
Braden, we're doing pretty well, and I understand that we have a guest with us today.
We do. Mr. AJ Skinner, fellow Rogers Royal alumni, big Badger fan, big D3 cross country runner. What's up, Mr. Skinner?
Not much, man. Not much. How you doing?
Doing phenomenal. So you're a Badger fan, obviously, and
Yep.
we wanted to ask you about the Luke Fickell hire, maybe the biggest coaching change of the offseason in college football, which is the topic of our episode today. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
It's a new era in Madison, the Barry Alvarez era, which it's kicked off for us in the early 90s, and it's carried all the way through. It's over. We have abandoned our 1940s style offense, and we have gone to the air raid, and it is an exciting time to be a Badger fan. Obviously, Fickell is a proven head coach at the Group 5 level. He led the only Group 5 team to the College World Playoff in Cincinnati 2 years ago, and right now he's bringing in really good staff with Phil Longo from North Carolina. He's produced some great quarterbacks with Matt Corral, Willie is at Ole Miss, and then also Drake May this past year, and then Sam Howell, and then Mike Tressel, who is a proven Big Ten defensive coordinator. So it's looking good. And then obviously some big transfers coming as well, and Tanner Mordecai, Nick Evers, and hopefully CJ Williams soon.
Yeah, Braden Locke, too, from Mississippi State.
Braden Locke. And then obviously, was it Jason Maitre from Boston College? I think I pronounced the last name right. So there's a lot of bright spots. And then Mabry Metauer, I think is how you say the last name. He's a 4-star in the 2023 class. So a lot of bright spots right now in Wisconsin.
Yeah, it's going to be weird seeing Wisconsin turn from being known for defense and not great offense outside of rushing the football to throwing the ball, 30,
gritty Midwest team going to the air raid.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, moving to this area, because obviously we're going to be passing the ball more than we're used to, but also just spacing the field more for Braylon Allen is going to be super nice. Ches Malusi as well at backup. So it'll be interesting to see. I think it'll be an adjustment for a lot of the older diehard Badger fans to see this new style of offense, but it's also going to be a lot of the same, using these big offensive linemen to make sure our quarterbacks have protection, and a lot more QB runs, I feel like, especially with Mordecai and his ability to run the read option.
What's your prediction for the Badgers in year one under Fickell?
I am thinking we're probably going to be in that 8-4 range. We've brought in a lot of good pieces, but it's a lot of young, raw talent. So I don't want to jump the gun and say, we're going to have a big breakout year. We host Ohio State midway through the season. And as much as I'd like to think we're going to keep that game close, I just don't see us competing with Ohio State within the next few years. It's still going to take plenty of years for Fickell to bring in guys that are going to be on that level. And then we also host Iowa, and I feel like, again, Iowa just has a much more complete roster. They're bringing in Cade McNamara. So I think they're probably the favorites in the West, and I don't see us – it'll probably be a good game, but I don't see us beating them this year. And then there's also some tough games. We're on the road at Illinois, we're on the road at Purdue, and we're on the road at Washington State, and I feel like any of those games are a potential loss. So I feel like 8-4 is a solid place to be for year one. 7-5 wouldn't even shock me either, honestly, if they're close losses.
I think the Big Ten West as a whole is going to be a lot more competitive this year in terms of like actually good competition, unlike last year where teams were trying to give the division away. So basically everybody but the Gophers and Northwestern has a chance, I would think.
Yep.
Well, without further ado, let's get things started. Our first category for the day is, Braden, who do you think is going to be the next Sonny Dykes of the new coaching hires this season?
Well, Sonny Dykes, first, he took over a TCU team that went 5-7 last year. He had some success at SMU, and in his first year as the head coach of the Frogs, brought him to the national championship. Obviously, they got steamrolled by Georgia, but so would most teams outside of Ohio State and Missouri. But my prediction for the next Sonny Dykes, the guy who's going to have immediate success at his new program, is Jeff Brom at Louisville. He just capped off Purdue's first appearance, I think, in the Big Ten championship all time. He turned down Louisville in the past after the 2018 season, which I thought meant he was going to stay at Purdue for the long haul. But I've noticed that guys have kind of, when they get offered a job a second time, are more likely to take it. We saw that with Hugh Freeze this year too with Auburn. But for why I think Brahms can have good success early on, Louisville has a very easy 2023 schedule. Their toughest opponent is Notre Dame, but they get them at home. And Notre Dame is, I think, going to be a good team this year. They were, struggling at the beginning of last year, losses to Marshall and Stanford, but I would expect some improvement there. The big win for Louisville here, though, is that they get to avoid Clemson and North Carolina in ACC play. So while they have to replace Malik Cunningham at quarterback, they brought in Jack Plummer from Cal. He was originally at Purdue before he transferred to Cal. So I think he'll be serviceable. And you mentioned, AJ, that they brought Isaac Guerrero. Is that how you pronounce his name?
Guerendo, yep.
Guerendo from Wisconsin. So he can be a workhorse at running back. And I think Brahms got some good success early on.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback off that because that's also who I have as the next Sonny Dykes. And you've got to be happy if you're a Louisville fan. Even though he didn't come to you the first time, you still got him in the end. And this is a guy who you mentioned has had a lot of success at Purdue. He's 36-34 in his tenure at Purdue. But just for a little perspective, in the 4 years before Jeff Brom, Purdue went combined 9-39. And in his tenure at Purdue, he knocked off number 2 Ohio State 49-20 in 2017, I believe that was, which ultimately led to Ohio State not making the playoff. He knocked off Tennessee 48-45 in OT last year in their bowl game. And then last year, he smoked number 2 Iowa 34-7 and number 5 Michigan State 40-29. So this is a guy who can not only win in big games, but he's shown that he can take a team who has been in the absolute garbage and turn them into a solid program.
Yeah, then I'm going to agree with Jeff Brom as well for this year's Sonny Dykes. And speaking of garbage, I mean, he's moving to the ACC, which is going to be garbage this year. I mean, Syracuse losing Sean Tucker, Wake Forest losing Sam Hartman, NC State losing Leary. There's just a lot of teams that are in it already what was the worst Power 5 conference last year. They're going to be taking a step back even more this year. And I feel like Brom's going to exploit that. I know the Big Ten West isn't the toughest conference on the year in the college football, but he still proved that he could get his team to play some tight games. I mean, there was that Ohio State win a couple of years ago. So he certainly has those capabilities. And in a conference where I don't think you're going to need the deepest roster to win some games next year, he can certainly come in and have first-year success, kind of stepping down from the level of Big Ten to ACC football. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to who do you guys think is the best Power 5 hiring?
I think it's got to be Matt Rule. He's already shown that he can be successful in quick rebuilds before. At Temple, he turned them from a very bad 2-10 team to a 10-game winner back-to-back seasons in just a 4-year span. Then he went to Baylor, was 1-11 in his first year there in 2017, following the stuff with Art Briles. And then by 2019, they were 11-3. So he's able to get quick rebuilds, turn them into competitive teams early on. And Nebraska's a college football blue blood, even though they haven't been recently. But they're going to get recruits. They already kind of have. They brought in 5 pretty highly rated defensive recruits already, led by Malachi Coleman, who's the number 84 recruit in the country overall, according to Rivals. And then in the portal, he brought in Jeff Sims at quarterback. Sims is pretty good at Georgia Tech in not the best offensive scheme, but I think Nebraska is in a good spot this year. They have a pretty easy 2023 schedule. They play Michigan at home on September 30th, and then at Wisconsin on November 18th, which is their 2 toughest games of the year by far. But I could see them winning, 8, 9, maybe even 10 games.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off that because I'm just copying you at this point. I've also got Matt Rule as my best Power 5 hire. And, you talked about him starting his tenure at Baylor as 1-11, and then in the 2 years after that, a combined 18-9, including an 11-3 season in his last year there. Didn't necessarily do very well in Carolina, but we've seen plenty of coaches have a lot of success at the college level, not translate to the NFL. Recently, you can say that about Urban Meyer, who didn't even last a season. Matt Rule at least did that. But, I mean, this is a Nebraska team who lost to 1-11 Northwestern last year. And, we saw Scott Frost turn UCF into a national champion, which was a load of shit, but that's besides the point. I mean, he didn't even make it 4 years at Nebraska. He was 0-14 against ranked opponents. So assuming that Matt Rule can be a little bit better than that, I think he'll be in a good situation.
Yeah, and you touched on shoot, I forgot what I was going to say. Never mind.
AJ,
I'm gonna disagree with you guys, since it was probably not Wisconsin bias, but I'm gonna say Luke Fickell is the best hire of the offseason. And that's not going to Matt Rule, because Matt Rule is a phenomenal hire for the Huskers. And Braden were talking for the show, and I was saying, I think he didn't get much higher than 9 or 10. He probably did. Well, he was at Baylor in that last year. But again, Nebraska is going to have so many more NIL opportunities where I feel like he's definitely going to be able to soar. But, and maybe it's because I don't follow them as much, but I just haven't seen the portal impact that I'd like to see from him right away. Jeff Sims is a good quarterback, but I don't think he's as good as some people give him credit for. I mean, he could totally just blow me away this year. But what Luke Fickell has done and just completely changed the system and brought Wisconsin was a desirable destination for 300-pound linemen who wanted to get drafted and running backs is what it was. And maybe a good edge rusher every once in a while. Now you have 4-star quarterbacks coming in left and right, and obviously we don't have a great history with those and Graham Mertz, but that was the old system. But Fickell has come in. He's completely. I mean, we have a new collective group, as most schools do, and he's totally aligning with them. Sam Decker is the head of it and former basketball player at the school, and he's been completely on board with Fickell. So he's kind of streamlined that and made the school more uniform. And honestly, I just don't see how this could end up going bad. I mean, as I said, that this could totally fall apart, but he's brought in a great staff around him. He's bringing in transfers at just a crazy rate. So I really feel like that Fickell was the best hire available this offseason. And if you look at last offseason when he took Cincinnati playoff, everyone said he's for sure gone. I know the Florida job with big rumors for him. There were lots of big jobs open, and he didn't take any of them. And then the big thing is everyone said he was waiting for the right opportunity. Apparently that was Wisconsin, but I just think with how coveted he was last offseason, the fact that he made the move this offseason, it is Luke Fickell for this offseason.
Yeah, I remember what I was going to say about Matt Rule now. You mentioned how poorly his tenure in Carolina went and how that kind of relates to Urban Meyer. Another example I want to bring up is Nick Saban, where very successful at LSU. Then he goes to the Miami Dolphins, flops there, and obviously what he's done at Alabama has turned them into an absolute dynasty over the last 10, 15 years. Sure, you're a big fan of Saban.
Sure am, Braden.
I don't think Rule will have that big of an impact, but I think you could get Nebraska into the playoff in the next 5 years. A lot of stuff has to break right for that to happen, but with a 12-team playoff, I think it's definitely possible.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Really quickly, before we go on to our worst Power 5 hire, I want to touch on one other guy, and that's Kenny Dillingham. He's only 32 years old, and he's going to be the youngest Power 5 coach in the country. Takes over at an Arizona State team that just went 3-9 and lost 2 quarterbacks to the transfer portal, Paul Tyson to Clemson, and then Emory Jones to Cincinnati. He's never been an offensive head coach before, but he's had a lot of success as an offensive coordinator around the country. Last year, he was the offensive coordinator at Oregon, and we saw tremendous improvement from Bo Nix this past year. He was the offensive coordinator at Memphis before that, and in 2017 and 2018, he had back-to-back top 5 offenses, and he was ranked the number 1 recruiter in the conference. So I think that Kenny Dillingham could be a really good hire for Arizona State.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's no coincidence that both of Bo Nix's best seasons, his freshman year in 2019 at Auburn, and then last year at Oregon, came with Dillingham as his offensive coordinator. And every year, wherever Dillingham has been, he's been successful leading high-powered offenses. Oregon had over 500 yards per game last year. He put up 43 points per game at Memphis in 2018. He put up 33 at Auburn in 2019, and then almost 40 this year at Oregon. He's been successful everywhere he's been, and I think this is a great hire for Arizona State. Obviously it carries some risks, but I think it's a good hire overall.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think especially the marriage of him with Drew Pine, who stepped in for a struggling Notre Dame offense last year with Tyler Buckner at the helm and Drew Pine. Didn't make them a playoff contender by any means, but he certainly raised their level. And I think, especially with a team like this, they're going to have their line is going to be incredibly low for wins next year, I'm guessing. But a marriage between Dillingham and Pine could be certainly good enough to get them that over on wins next year. So,
yeah, definitely. Let's move on to our worst Power 5 hire. AJ, I'll let you kick this one off.
So I'll spoil Braden's because I know what's coming, so I want to touch on some other guys. I know Scott Satterfield is probably what most people are thinking now with Cincinnati moving to the Big 12 and them being Power 5. But a couple guys that I want to touch on were not guys that I necessarily think are going to struggle, but they just are so unproven that I don't know. And those are Zach Arnett at Mississippi State and Ryan Walters at Purdue. With Arnett, it was definitely, I think, the right hire, the safe hire, just with everything that's happened there. You know, I want him to succeed so bad because that program deserves it with what happened to them. But again, there's just not much known about him. The SEC West is a gauntlet. So it'll be interesting to see, because I'm guessing they'll give him a few years to just see who he's able to get in for recruiting. But eventually they reach a point where he's got to be winning games. So hopefully he can get it going, but I don't expect much this year, but hopefully he can get it going next few years. But again, he's just unproven at the head coach position. They didn't look great in their bowl game offensively, but of course he's a defense coordinator and their defense looked stout. So we'll see what happens. And then again, another defensive guy, Ryan Walters, going to Purdue to be their head coach, Illinois defensive coordinator last year. Again, just unproven in terms of the head coaching position. He's got Graham Harrell at offensive coordinator, which does give me a lot of hope that that offense can do well with Hudson Card at quarterback as well. And I think the defense will be fine, but the Big Ten West is improving, so he's going to have to match some proven winners in Luke Fickell and Matt Rule, and then Ferentz is always going to find a way to pull out some bull crap wins. So it'll be interesting to see in the future.
The Iowa special.
Yep.
I think I'm a little
Braden,
bit
what do
more
you got?
bullish on. I'm a little bit more bullish on Ryan Walters than I am on Zach Arnett. I think Arnett is definitely the right hire, at least for continuity reasons. If you kind of look outside, it's not the greatest for, PR, I guess. I think he can have a decent tenure there, but I don't see a very high ceiling for him at Mississippi State. I think they'd be lucky to reach more than 8 or 9 wins in any of his seasons there. But then with Ryan Walters, I think his style kind of fits the Big Ten West really well. Obviously, it's changing a little bit with Wisconsin becoming more of a high-powered offense, we would think. Nebraska should be better offensively, but Walters' defense is going to be very good to match up against, the Illinois of the world, the Iowas, the Minnesotas. Everybody matches up well with Northwestern, so that's not really an issue. But I think he could have some success early on. I don't see him, having a great year one. I haven't looked too hard at Purdue's schedule, but I don't think they're going to win more than like 6 or 7 games this year, which I think would be a success in the first year under Walters. As for my worst Power 5 hire, you already spoiled it, Skinner. It's Scott Satterfield. He had success with Appalachian State, transitioning them from the FCS to the Sun Belt, but then he got hired by Louisville after Jeff Brom turned him down, and he went just 25-24. He was rumored to be fired by the Cardinals after the year anyways, and then Cincinnati hires him away before they played Louisville in the bowl game, which was kind of funny. One of my main concerns about Satterfield is who he brought in as his offensive coordinator, and that would be Tom Manning, formerly of Iowa State. Iowa State had some good offenses with Breece Hall and Brock Purdy, but then in their first year without him, completely fell apart. They were 122nd in rush yards per attempt and 105th in pass yards per attempt, which I think there's, 131 FBS teams, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Sounds right. Yep.
So very close to the bottom of the pack in both of those categories. And I would be very concerned if I was a Cincinnati fan downgrading from Fickell to Satterfield.
Yeah, Satterfield's also mine. You touched on the record in 4 years at Louisville. Not exactly great. And now you're being basically an upgrade in Jeff Brom. Satterfield did. He went 47-16 in 5 years at Appalachian State. He had a good track record there. But it's just been kind of disappointing at Louisville. I mean, in 2020, they were ranked to start the year. They went 4-7. and this year they're coming off their first winning season since 2019. As AJ touched on, Cincinnati moving to the Big 12, and he's got big shoes to fill as it is with Luke Fickell leaving. So it feels like Satterfield's almost set up to fail a little bit. But it'll be interesting to see how he does. I mean, you touched on the offensive coordinator hiring, and it's almost like when you've got good players on offense, it makes your offense better, and then when they leave, it's going to be worse. Who would have thought that? But yeah, I'm with you that Satterfield's probably the worst Power 5 hire.
One last thing that I just thought about Walters real quick is Big Ten's getting rid of divisions after next year. So that whole Big Ten West defense type thing, that's going to be changing because you're going to be playing more teams from the East, your Penn States, your Michigans, your Ohio States, and then UCLA and USC are going to bring more high-powered offense as well. So just another thing to keep in mind with that I just thought of there.
Forgot about that. Yeah, that'll be interesting. I wonder how the Big Ten is going to do scheduling for that, where if they'll kind of keep it, mostly regional based, where they're not going to have UCLA and USC playing Rutgers every year. But
you would hope not, at least.
Yeah.
Bring back the legends and the leaders.
So, yeah, that might be a little bit of a thorn in, Purdue's side there, but I think you could still have some success. If you can have a good year this year, something to just build on, at least kind of get a good recruiting base. I think it can go all right, but I could also see it being a disaster.
Yep. Best group of 5 hiring. AJ, who you got?
Jamie frickin' Chadwell. The Mullets are moving to Liberty. Couldn't be more excited about this. I liked Coastal with the Grayson McCall Mormons versus Mullets game. Been a fan of watching Liberty with Malik Willis. And although, to me, honestly, the hire doesn't make a lot of sense moving from the Sun Belt to Conference USA, which Liberty will be joining next year. I personally feel like the Sun Belt has been a better football conference, and that is the moneymaker in terms of things. Conference USA just lost a few members. I believe it was Southern Miss and Marshall. And was Old Dominion Conference USA and joined the Sun Belt as well, I think?
I think so. Did they lose Middle Tennessee too? Or are they still?
They still have Middle Tennessee.
Okay.
And then they're adding Sam Houston State and is it Jacksonville State next year?
I think Jacksonville State,
yeah.
That sounds right.
And so they're adding those two as well, Conference USA. But at the same time, Liberty, Hugh Freeze proved you could get it done there as an independent. So joining a conference, Jamie Chadwell has proven he can get the job done in the Sun Belt. I love the hire. I feel like it's going to be a great option for quarterbacks. I was talking with Braden about Zach Calzada. He's going to be playing at Incarnate Word next year, even though he beat Alabama 2 years ago. So I feel like that's going to be a great option for your Power 5 guys that maybe don't turn out as much. Go have some success there. Maybe rebuild your draft stock a little, or with the way you can transfer every year, get back to a Power 5. I just think J.B. Chadwell, what he's done at Coastal and making them a pretty nationally known name for people that are even more casual followers of the sport, he's going to be able to do that with Liberty now.
Yeah. There's a little bit of concern that I have. I think he's a great coach. I think he's a great hire for Liberty. But the only concern I would have is how much that Coastal Carolina offense fell apart when Grayson McCall went down. You had the Sun Belt Championship where they got outscored, I think, like 47-7 by Troy or something like that. I think McCall actually played in that game, but I think he's playing through an injury. I think that there's a little bit of a concern that maybe McCall made Chadwell as opposed to the other way around. I don't think that's too big of a deal. I think Chadwell was definitely more instrumental in Grayson McCall's development than the other way around. So overall, good hire. However, I think that Kevin Wilson going to Tulsa is the best Group of 5 hire. He previously was the head coach at Indiana from 2011 to 2016. Was unsuccessful there to say the least. 26-47 overall. Not very good in the Big Ten either. He had his best years at the end with a 6-7 season and a 6-6 season. But I think what he's done recently with Ohio State kind of makes up for that. Between 2017 and 2019, Ohio State had just an absurdly good offense, putting up over 500 yards per game. Second most touchdowns in the country during that time frame. Number 1 in touchdown passes. Obviously, there's the issue of did the talent make him kind of similar to what I was talking about with McCall and Chadwell. But I think that Kevin Wilson should have success at Tulsa as head coach. Ohio State, every year with Wilson as their offensive coordinator, led the Big Ten in total offense and scoring offense. I don't think that'll translate immediately to Tulsa, but he's kind of a quarterback's guy. and I would be excited to see what he can do if I were a Tulsa fan. Also,
Yeah.
he has that Oklahoma connection because he was coached under Bob Stoops as the offensive coordinator there for a while.
There you go. Yeah, I'm with AJ. I think Jamie Chadwell is the best Group of 5 hiring. But before I talk a little bit about him, I want to talk about his coaching career because it's been an interesting one. So in 2009, he started his head coaching career at North Greenville, and then so he in his 3 years there, he went 20-14, and he led them to the Division II playoffs in the 2011 season. And then the next season after that, they lost to Delta State in the quarterfinals. After that loss to Delta State, he was hired by Delta State as the same position, and then he resigned 1 year later, and then he took over at Charleston Southern, and then after Charleston Southern, he went over to Coastal Carolina, was the offensive coordinator there for a year, and then he took over as head coach. So I just thought that was a fun little coaching carousel. But in the last 3 years at Coastal, he went 31-6. He won Coach of the Year in 2020. 9-3 this year, despite Grayson McCall missing some time. And Braden, like you mentioned, that offense when McCall wasn't there, it was a little rough. I think 47-7 against James Madison was one of those games that he was out. So just a world of difference there. But I think that he's going to have plenty of success at Liberty. Like AJ mentioned, Hugh Freeze made it look pretty easy. So I think that Jamie Chadwell is going to have a good career there. Before we wrap it up, let's talk about a few more guys that we maybe didn't touch on. First one being Deion Sanders. Braden, I'll let you start it off.
This is a hire that's either going to be great or it's going to blow up in Colorado's face, I think, almost immediately. He has his work cut out for him. I think Colorado was, 1-11 last year, and they were just completely non-competitive in almost every game. And then he told almost the whole team to leave. He brought in some guys from the portal, obviously Travis Hunter being that, top guy. I don't think they're going to have a great season this year. I think people are going to be kind of overhyping them. I would expect somewhere between 5-7 and 7-5, but I'm sure we'll see a lot of 8-4, 9-3, 10-2 projections. I just don't see it. I think we touched on it when me, you, and Ben did the college football playoff breakdown.
Yep, I was just about to mention that.
Yeah, so I think we're going to see the Colorado hype train leaving the station probably 1 year too early. I think next year is a good spot to see, if he's not winning, at least 7 games next year, then I think there's going to be some concerns. And I think people are going to start calling for him to be fired at that point, which might be a little bit extreme. But I think overall, it's a solid hire, at least just for the recruiting. If he's a bad coach, you're still going to get talent to go there. And I think it's worth the risk for Colorado, at least right now.
Yeah, and you mentioned the coaching and the recruiting. The recruiting is not going to be a problem, I don't think. I mean, we saw what he was able to do. I mean, he got 4- and 5-star guys at an HBCU school, which brings up my only concern for him. It's a very limited sample size. I mean, he has 2 years of coaching. He was 4-3 in his first season at Jackson State, I believe, and then 12-0 last year, I think, or 11-1. Was it 11-1?
I think he might have coached there for 3 years because
I
know he won Coach of the Year in 2021.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, he had 4- and 5-star guys at an HBCU school. So odds are you're going to have success when that's the case. So it's just going to be interesting to see how he's able to jump from that to a Power 5 school.
Yeah, next year, I don't think it's going to be a first year in Boulder for Deion, just because you got Michael Penix back leading a really good Washington team. Washington State's going to be 8-4, maybe a little less. They're going to be solid again next year. Oregon and Oregon State are both, I think, only going to improve from how they did last year. USC is going to USC. UCLA will have a quarterback battle, but I think they'll still be fine next year. It's just going to be Cam Rising's back at Utah. It's going to be a tough year in the Pac-12. And then Deion Sanders, I want him to succeed, but at the same time, he's kind of, in my mind, has the potential to be the Coach Calipari of college football, where he can recruit like no one else, but he just cannot win despite the fact that he brings in so much talent. He had 4- and 5-star guys at an HBCU and lost the Celebration Bowl twice in a row, playing against probably maximum 3 stars at the other school. So that raises a lot of concern for me. And obviously they weren't blowout losing, Well, actually, the first one to South Carolina State was probably, I think it was double-digit loss, and last year it was an overtime loss. But he's going to have to prove that he can coach, because you can bring in all the talent you want, but there's still going to be Dan Lanning's going to bring in just as much talent at Oregon. Washington's on the comp, so he's going to have to start proving that he can win with the talent, and the competition's only going to get tougher from here on out.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if he can succeed with other teams being vastly more talented than his, as opposed to the other way around. So there's definitely going to be a little bit of a learning curve, and it just depends on how long of a leash Colorado gives him, I think.
Yep. Yeah, maybe don't give him a lifetime contract like Calipari got, but that's besides the point. Let's move on to the SEC and Hugh Freeze. Braden, what do you got?
Well, on the field, he's a great coach. He's shown he can win in the SEC before. In his time at Ole Miss, he went 39-25. Officially, that's 10-25 though, because of some vacated wins. He was 19-21 in the SEC, made 2 New Year's Six appearances, and then after he got fired by Ole Miss, he went to Liberty and brought him to bowl games every season he was there. However, the issue with Hugh Freeze is the off-the-field stuff. He had that escort scandal at Ole Miss that got him fired, and then at Liberty, he was DMing a student who was a sexual assault victim and suing the university over how they handled her incident there. And with Auburn being notoriously impatient, and how after Brian Harsin had coached there for 1 year, they tried to get him fired. The boosters tried to get him fired by saying he was having an affair with one of his assistants on his staff. This is a match made in hell. I don't think this is going to turn out well for either party. If Hugh Freeze does not have at least like an 8-win season within the first 2 years. And in the SEC, I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't think this is going to go as well as some people do. I mean, he gets to play Ole Miss every single season, which is cool. They're both in the SEC West. But Auburn didn't grab a quarterback in the transfer portal. You know, there was rumors of Grayson McCall from Coastal, Devin Leary from NC State. But it looks like they're going to be rolling with Robbie Ashford next year, which Robbie Ashford's got potential. He's a very raw quarterback to me. He looked solid against Alabama. He looked better than I thought he would. But, I mean, he's not a quarterback that's going to win you 10 games in a season. Auburn's got a top 20 recruiting class at the moment. They've got 7 4-stars. And like you mentioned, he's shown that he can win in the SEC. But even with the vacated wins and all the recruiting scandals, he never had more than 10 wins in a season. He had 10 wins in 2015, including they beat Alabama that year. And then he had 4 8-win seasons at Liberty. So he's a very solid coach, but I think you're probably looking for a little more than solid if you're Auburn right now.
Greatest coach to ever coach from a hospital bed. But God, that's such a fun image to look at when he was at Liberty. But, you know, I think Auburn might have just seen Hugh Freeze in those 2 straight wins against Alabama and thought, oh, he can beat Alabama. There's our guy. But again, I agree with you guys. This is just with the short leash he's going to have. And, I mean, I think he's one mistake away from getting fired. He's going to have a short leash no matter what, just with his behavior. And then in terms of performance, having that short leash, I don't see this working out super well. And, you know, potentially I talked about Zach Arnett not lasting at Mississippi State. Who knows? Maybe Auburn moves on. Maybe Mississippi State moves on. Hugh Freeze to Mississippi State in a few years. But I don't see this working out super well at Auburn.
Yeah, the one kind of good aspect, though, is Hugh Freeze has had success with quarterbacks before. You know, you had Chad Kelly at Ole Miss, and then develops Malik Willis into a pretty good NFL prospect at Liberty. So maybe you can do something with Robbie Ashford, but I just do not see this going well.
Yeah, and the athleticism is absolutely there for Ashford. I mean, we've seen what he can do with his legs. It's just going to be developing his arm. It's going to be the problem. But Hugh Freeze could certainly do it. Willie, I don't know, but that's not my job. One last guy before we wrap things up. I want to talk about Trent Dilfer. Either of you guys want to start this off?
I thought this was a very interesting hire, to say the least. I don't think he ever coached above the high school level. And then UAB brings him on. Former Super Bowl winning quarterback with the Ravens. But this hire was completely out of left field. And I don't see it going too well for the Blazers early on. Maybe he can do something, but I think he would have been better suited to be, you know, an offensive coordinator first to at least learn the ropes. I just don't see this being a very good decision for UAB.
Yeah, it's so tough to tell right now, but I tend to agree with you. You mentioned he's a Super Bowl winning quarterback in Super Bowl 35, I want to say it was. The head of the Elite 11, and he gets a pretty experienced quarterback in Dylan Hopkins, who in the last 2 years, I want to say, is right around the 30 touchdown, 10 interception range. You mentioned also that he's never coached above the high school level. Coached at Lipscomb Academy for like 4 or 5 years. Went 44-10 there. And in the 2 years before him, they went 3-19. So maybe that says a little something. But going from the high school level to UAB just seems like a jump that maybe he's not necessarily ready for. He can obviously work with quarterbacks, but there's 22 guys that start on a football team. So it's more than just quarterbacks. So it's going to be interesting to see how he pans out there.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think UAB is making the jump to the American next year. So moving to a tougher conference and inexperienced coach. I don't know a lot about Trent Dilfer, but that doesn't seem like the greatest recipe. But at the same time, the American's not going to be all that strong next year, despite the fact that it is a little stronger than Conference USA. But we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, I think they're bringing in
UAB, I believe that's all we got for you guys. AJ, thanks for joining us. It was great having you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And we will catch you guys in the next one.
Thanks for coming on.
And Braden's gone.
We lost Braden. It says it's
All
still
right.
recording.
I'm sure you guys can edit this all.
Yeah, I'm sure we can.
All right. See ya.
'Cause,
Thanks
yeah,
for having me, man.
Yeah, was Braden lagging for you?
He was